Hello and welcome to the Apologists Angle for today, October 10th, 2024, an AI-generated Christian cultural apologetic perspective on today's news. This podcast is based directly on the writings of the Christian cultural apologists discussed, but like all AI, it can make mistakes. In the news today, the latest updates from Florida as Hurricane Milton approaches. The storm has been downgraded to a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. Despite the downgrade, forecasters warn that it remains a grave threat and could still cause significant damage and loss of life. Officials have urged residents to evacuate inland, warning that they will die if they stay behind. Homeless people are seeking shelter in Florida ahead of Milton's arrival. Dashcam footage shows wind and heavy rain lashing the Matlacha coast, with debris flying across roads and trees bending in the strong winds. Local residents, still recovering from Hurricane Helene just weeks earlier, are bracing for what could be another devastating blow. Zoos and aquariums in vulnerable parts of the state remain closed, with workers taking steps to protect the animals during the storm surge. 9 African penguins were moved to higher ground ahead of the hurricane, while sloths were also evacuated, slowly. At Zoo Tampa, safety measures are in place for its nearly 1,300 animals, with some being herded into shelters and others being transported to safer locations. Heavy rains have been lashing towns and cities in Florida, with images showing broken utility poles, boats struggling to stay upright in choppy seas, and palm trees swaying in the wind. The aftermath of Hurricane Helene and the approaching Hurricane Milton has left residents scrambling for ways to fortify their homes or find sanctuary elsewhere. But the cost of doing so is burdensome at best and devastating at worst. One resident, Alexandra Marcella, had a baby 2 weeks ago and is seeking shelter with her in-laws to ride out the storm. She invested in a new roof and Category 5 hurricane-proof windows in 2021, but remains worried. Alligators are able to detect the approach of a hurricane and usually find shelter, but they may become scattered during the storm and encounters with humans can occur. If you encounter an alligator, run fast and straight ahead and avoid them altogether if possible. Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, remained open for part of Wednesday with a staggered closing schedule due to the approaching hurricane. Commentary inspired by the writings of D.A. Carson. As Hurricane Milton descends upon Florida, unleashing its unrelenting fury, we are reminded that amidst chaos and devastation lies a profound truth. God's sovereignty over creation is absolute. The tempest raging across the Sunshine State may appear to be an unmitigated calamity, but it also harbors a hidden purpose, one that speaks to our own vulnerability and the limitations of human control. As we witness the devastation unfold, with winds wailing at 125 miles per hour and rain lashing down on the hapless residents of Florida, we are compelled to confront the reality of our own mortality. The officials' warnings to evacuate or face death serve as jarring reminders that our lives hang precariously in the balance, subject to the whims of a force far greater than ourselves. And yet, even as we tremble before the storm's fury, we find solace in the words of Jesus, who taught us about God's power over nature in the calming of the storm. This event, recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, demonstrates not just Jesus' authority and divine identity, but also the fundamental truth that God is sovereign over all creation. Carson notes in his commentary on Matthew, "The miracle is not simply that Jesus calmed a storm. It is that he demonstrated his divine authority over the natural world." In this moment of tranquility amidst turmoil, we are given a glimpse into the very fabric of reality. God's power and providence underlie all things, even the most seemingly destructive events. As the residents of Florida scramble to find shelter and safety, they are reminded that their lives are not in their own hands. The storm raging outside is mirrored by the turmoil within, as fears and anxieties threaten to overwhelm them. And yet, it is precisely in this moment of vulnerability that we discover our greatest strength, trust in God's goodness and providence. As Carson so eloquently puts it, we must look beyond the immediate circumstances to the larger purposes of God. The storm may seem like an unmitigated disaster, but it also holds within it a hidden purpose, one that speaks to our own redemption and salvation. In the midst of chaos, we find peace. In the face of destruction, we discover hope. As the zookeepers at Zoo Tampa work tirelessly to protect their charges from the storm surge, they are reminded that even the most vulnerable creatures depend on something greater than themselves for survival. The African penguins, sloths, and alligators, each with their own unique vulnerabilities, serve as a poignant microcosm of the interconnectedness of all life. And so, as we watch Hurricane Milton rage across Florida, let us remember that our lives are not just our own, but also part of a larger tapestry, woven together by the very hand of God. In this moment of vulnerability, we discover our greatest strength, trust in God's goodness and providence, a trust that transcends even the most devastating storms. For in the end, it is not the storm that defines us, but our response to it. Will we tremble before its fury, or will we find peace in the midst of chaos? The choice is ours, but one thing is certain: God's sovereignty over creation is absolute, and his power and providence underlie all things, even the most seemingly destructive events. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Apologist's Angle. Be sure to come back tomorrow for a new take on the day's news from the perspective of Christian cultural apologetics.